You may have seen the commercials in the He Gets Us campaign on television. What was behind them, and what's the strategy for reaching people with these commercial spots? Our Talbot Dean, Ed Stetzer, has been involved in the campaign from the start and will give us a behind-the-scenes look at these very creative portraits of Jesus. I'm your host, Scott Ray.
And I'm your co-host, Sean McDowell.
This is Think Biblically from Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. Ed, welcome. So glad to have you with us, especially glad to have you as the Dean of Talbot School of Theology.
Good to be back. Good to be back on the podcast, but also good to be here at the Talbot School of Theology with you folks.
Now, I suspect many of our listeners have seen the He Gets Us
I can actually tell you statistically they've all seen the commercials. If they have a screen, they've seen the commercials.
And we'll see a lot more of them in the upcoming Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So what is the He Gets Us campaign about, and what makes it so different and unique?
So it's only a campaign. The He Gets Us ad campaign is basically an air campaign with ads and media on all kinds of platforms. You know, people have seen it on TikTok, or people have seen it they'll see it in the Super Bowl, to help people consider who Jesus is by seeking to build a bridge across which they will travel to then say, I want to learn more, go to the website, and then, for example, go to the Bible reading plans. And, I don't have the most recent number, but 600,000 people thus far have made the trip ultimately to subscribing to the Bible reading plans. We have some of the highest reading responses to the YouVersion Bible reading plans.
So obviously there's some people that are in favor of this.
Yeah.
There's obviously some criticism.
Yeah.
I've seen some of both.
Right.
How has the team and the leadership processed some of this criticism, and what is some of the criticism that's come out against it?
Well, so the Super Bowl was the peak of the criticism.
That's right.
So in the middle of the Super Bowl, AOC, the liberal congresswoman from New York, tweeted, I'm paraphrasing, this is trying to make fascism look benign. So, not exactly a friendly response to the ads. Now, why would they say such a thing? Well, because a lot of news stories came out that one of the funders of this is, on more conservative side, and they give to, they give to a fund that gives to different funds. And so all of a sudden it's like, well, this is bad. And so that was at the beginning. And my joke is, and 1 million people went to the website during the Super Bowl after AOC tweeted. So that, that had a lot of people.
Okay, there you go.
It wasn't really 1 million, but that's my joke. 1 million people. Thank you, AOC. So then Charlie Kirk tweeted a little later that the Green family. So remember, one of the families that helped to resource this is the Green family. So the Hobby Lobby family. And,
yep.
And so then Charlie Kirk tweeted, and I don't remember the exact wording, but something like they're being fooled into, misportraying Jesus or something like that. And then 1 million people come to the website. So the reality is we live in a time when it's 2024, boys and girls. Everything's controversial. Everyone is someone's hero, someone's villain. And when you run ads that are geared towards engaging skeptics using creative ways, C.S. Lewis talked about why he wrote fanciful stories. He wanted to steal past the watchful dragons, because in his day, everyone sort of knew the gospel story. So what he said is, we'd say sneak today. I'm trying to sneak past these watchful dragons of your familiarity with the story of the Christian story with these fanciful tales that he would tell. Well, so in some ways, the campaign is trying to steal past the watchful dragons of people who've sort of rejected Christianity. Say, look what Jesus did. And he had some pretty shocking things about how he elevated women, how he challenged the religious authorities. I mean, we can look at dozens of things. So that, to a skeptic who may have rejected Christianity, in that frame, then say, well, I want to learn more. And then they go to the website and they learn more. They go to the Bible reading plans. So I think Joe Carter wrote kind of a thing about the He Gets Us campaign that I tend to read. I read the different criticism. I read the different suggestions. I read the different things. But in that case, he said, man, if you like pre-evangelism, you probably will get the He Gets Us campaign more. Because it's not like in 30 seconds, in 60 seconds, the ads in the Super Bowl coming up. A lot of people will listen to this after the Super Bowl. But the 2024 Super Bowl, it's 60 seconds at this time. These things change, which I didn't know. But it's 60 seconds and then a 15-second one. You can't go from creation, fall, redemption, and restoration.
Of course.
God, us, sin, Christ's response. So it's a conversation starter. So we knew there'd be some criticism. I think there's things to learn and to be clearer on. And part of early on, I wanted to help them be clearer on some things as well. So that's all part of that journey.
But let me ask you this. In terms of the pushback, you've got some from the left, you got some from the right. You gave us numbers.
Yeah.
do we know that these are actually skeptics that have responded, or are these Christians going, oh, I should be reading the Bible, I'm going to sign up?
Yeah, we don't know. And that's because we don't ask them demographic questions when they come, because people aren't generally willing to give demographic questions when they come. So for us, we've seen, I through some of these referrals to churches, countless people come into faith in Christ, and I love that. But we don't know of the percentage of individual people, largely because what we used to call seekers, and now we might call explorers or curiously skeptics, whatever.
Sure.
They don't tend to give you their demographic profile or their religious background. So we're not sure. We do know the numbers that we do know, and we do know that. This was the most talked about ad in last year's Super Bowl, before more than anything else.
So how do you know that? Just searched online?
Well, there's actually like magazines that report like ad meters and stuff like that.
Enough, yeah.
So the most talked about, and so we know that it helped to foster a conversation about who Jesus is. One of the stats that was interesting was people searched for Jesus more during the Super Bowl than they did during Christmas that year.
Really?
So that seems to me, now the challenge is search for Jesus, all kinds of stuff about Jesus
that
out
is
there.
The problem. Just objections or criticisms I've heard people express.
Yeah, totally.
And get your take on this. One is people would say, how much does a Super Bowl ad cost? $5 million, $10 million? I
think it's somewhere between 5 and 10, but it's a lot of money.
So even creating it behind it, we're thinking tens of millions of dollars. And there's a commercial for Bud Light with somebody scantily clad, deodorant, a car. He gets
Let me just be clear that I don't participate with Bud Light, but if you want to say that there's an ad for that, I understand.
Fair enough. There's a lot at the Super Bowl, of course.
It's not a bastion of righteousness.
So how do we, I just justify, or not justify, explain the thinking behind so much money for a 30-second ad.
Totally. Yeah.
Walk us through that process.
It is probably the most common objection, particularly from maybe secular people. Not that you're secular, Sean, but the reason is
I work for you.
Yeah,
so.
True. Fair enough. Fair enough. I would say that for me, I know some of the folks behind it. I don't know everybody, but I know some folks behind it, and they had a burden that Christianity really has been misrepresented in culture, and one of the ways that they would like to foster a better understanding of the Christian faith is to point to who Jesus was and what he did. So again, it's sort of like what was the burden on their heart, but of course the challenge is, there's not a thing that you do that someone might say you should have done it this way or differently. But I'm not, and I don't think they're bothered by that. That's just something that they had the resources to do, and they felt the call to do. And it actually, there's actually news stories that sort of talk about where, they said, how did the Christian message get so misunderstood? And how do we help people understand who Jesus is? So again, back to that frame: who Jesus is, what he does, what he's done, how to understand him more. That's what they wanted to focus on.
Okay, so let me push back.
Please, no, my feelings never
again,
hurt.
because I know they're not. Some people say, okay, if we're focusing on who he is and what he did, he might get us to empathy, the incarnation, but not the death and the resurrection, which is the root of the message itself. So it's not really focused ultimately on what he did. I've heard that pushback, so give us some context.
Yeah, so again, this is more pre-evangelism. We're going to keep coming back to that. Evangelism would be proclaiming Jesus' death on the cross for our sin and in our place, and calling women and men to respond by grace and through faith to the good news of that gospel. And the guy who's leading the campaign is a committed follower of Jesus. But there's a team that actually speaks into this that helps to avoid some Christian jargon and things of that sort. So
that makes sense.
You
Super
would be,
helpful.
if you're like, this is not either of you, but if you been going to church for 30 years, you love Jesus with your whole heart, these ads are not targeted towards you. So you may feel that because you're not the audience. Now, the question is the audience being moved? And I think that's right now. We're kind of thinking through, got some new leadership. I'm not the new leadership. We got some new leadership. We're saying, are we moving the needle the way that we want to? So those are always questions. I think those are good questions to ask.
So let's be a little more specific about the frame that you're talking about. What are some ways in which you think Jesus has been misrepresented that the campaign's trying to correct?
So what are some ways I think Jesus has been misrepresented? What I write about often is contextualization. And when people make the assumption that Jesus is a certain cultural expression or a political party or a way of of dress or whatever, and they kind of put. And I think what's happened is because let's be honest, I don't think Christians have always represented Jesus and his kingdom well. It's one of the reasons I wrote Christians in the Age of Outrage, is that they not represented Jesus and his kingdom well. So what happened is that people have sort of missed that Jesus. But I think that's the question is like, if people see Christians and assume, for example, Jesus is anti-women, but nobody around the table, everyone around the table would just say Jesus was shockingly pro and affirming of women in first century. Shockingly. Women witnessed his resurrection. The woman at the well, we could give hundreds of examples. So when you tell people that Jesus was pro-woman, what does that mean? And obviously that means different people to whoever hears those words. When you and I hear that, we're like, well, of course he was. But other people hear that and say, well, what? Because it's all tied up in the secular things.
Right.
So the end result is, from that frame, they go learn more. So again, keep hearing that in the frame,
Yeah.
If it produces the or the hook, as you called it, I want to learn more. Then ultimately, if we believe, as I do, that the Bible is God's inerrant, inspired word, and we can have people reading the Bible. So again, that's the pathway, because there's too many people on the pathway for everyone to have a conversation with. But if we get people engaging God's word, and those people who are interested in also engaging a church, that to me is a substantive step forward. But those places, there again, back to C.S. Lewis, we've got to steal past the watchful dragons. They say, oh, those Christians, that must mean Jesus is like this. Read the Jesus of the New Testament. It's pretty shocking. And then you hear the full story of the message, and it changes your life, it changes everything, and ultimately renews all things.
And what I think is perhaps most powerful about the campaign is just the 3 words, he gets us.
Yeah.
I found myself in a few sermons making that point and literally stopping and saying, as the famous campaign says, he gets us, which means it's an effective campaign. So obviously that has power. It's 3 short words. What's the story behind, what did it take to come up with that? Why did they choose that angle?
That was pre-me.
Okay.
But there's this team, and Bill and Jason, they have this. It's kind of strange because there are a lot of players involved. Like there's this marketing agency, Haven, it's this creative hub in Grand Rapids, and then Lerma's in Dallas. So Lerma sort of makes it, but early on, He Gets the stuff sort of comes out of Bill McKendry, who's a very well-known person in this field, very committed Christian, and I'm not sure how soon was that because I'm not sure where Jason Vanderground actually now leads that organization. I'm not 100% sure who first came up with it, but for me the thing that and again, I recognize that it must drive you a little crazy that people have a lot of Josh McDowell references in your life. But if you remember the Crew days, so I grew up on Long Island outside of New York City.
Okay.
And a non-Christian home. And I remember seeing bumper stickers with 3 words on them. I found it. And if you've been around long enough, so you remember this I found it camp. It actually happened on multiple iterations. Now, I never knew what it was until I became a professor and scholar and taught evangelism. I taught a history of evangelism campaigns once. And so I found out that that's an evangelism campaign. But I remember my dad and my mom, we were driving down the road, the cigarettes full, smoke in the car, this kind of stuff. Little before your day, Sean. No seatbelts, probably sitting on the dashboard, looking out the back of the station wagon. But they would see the bumper stickers, and we didn't know what it was. So it was, I found it, and I got it all over my shirt. I found it, but I've lost it. Where is it now? And so I remember, I talked to my dad later on. I said, oh, yeah, I remember making fun of that. And because it never said what it was. 3 words, kind of clearly articulated, I found it. Well, something's changed since the 70s. It's called, wait for it, the interwebs. So there are these vacuum tubes that communicate information. So the simplicity of this kind of reminds me of I found it, he gets us. So who's he? You're going to look in the mirror. What does it mean he gets? Because remember, the campaign's emphasizing the human life of Jesus. So he lived this, he gets us. And then there's the sense of the bridge to you. But also put a .com on the end of that. And that's where people can go learn more. And that's to the Bible reading plan. Because I found it still to this day. I didn't tell my dad the full story of what that necessarily was. But still to this day, I think all kinds of people like me outside of New York City as a kid saw the campaign, didn't know what it was. So the 3 words are important. Yeah. But these 3 words, he gets us, each has a pretty profound meaning. So I love it.
So let's be a little more specific about some of the things that are included in the book that we see from the campaign. How were the various aspects of the life of Jesus selected?
Yeah. So what happens is that they'll kind of look for different aspects of Jesus' life. At that point, they'll often engage me and some others and say, how could we rightfully but creatively, kind of explain or extrapolate some of what's there. But I think, some keywords, the keywords we're looking for ways to explain the confounding love of Jesus. So give you examples. So, around Thanksgiving and Christmas, you may be aware that people sometimes have family conflict around the holidays. Well, Jesus had some of that as well. I mean, think about, when he was at the temple and his mother and so we can actually say, where does that come from? How did Jesus walk through that? So you look for points of commonality, which I think is very missiologically appropriate. So Paul looked for commonality with the Jews at Pisidian Antioch and went to history. He looked for commonality with the people at Lystra and the backwaters of the Roman Empire and went to nature. He looked for commonalities and went to Epicurean and Stoic philosophy and poetry. So I think that there's commonality with that. Now you might say, well, I wouldn't have done it this way or that way. And part of the challenge is, like when the ad where clearly was portraying a picture of Jesus and the disciples as a misunderstood group of people in tricked out cars. Again, people are like, well, Jesus didn't drive. They know Jesus didn't drive. But if it makes you think, well, man, how was Jesus misunderstood? There's the bridge. How was Jesus misunderstood? Then go to the website, learn more, go to the Bible plan to understand who Jesus is fully and rightly. So that's the trajectory, the desired trajectory.
Okay, so I've got another one for you.
Please. I'm not shocked that you do.
So when you look at what Christians believe about Jesus, not all have a theology that you and I would like them to have that we teach here at Talbot School of Theology.
But if they go to the Talbot School of Theology with their fully online MDiv now available, undergrad as well. Sorry.
Good commercial. Those who say I'm a born-again Christian, even go to church to some degree, the amount who say Jesus sinned, or the amount who say Jesus was not born of a virgin, or he's one way to God, etc. So they need to be reminded of good biblical theology. If this is towards skeptics, I would assume that they understand the human side of Jesus, but probably not the divine side of Jesus.
Right.
So why are these emphasizing more the human side to get the skeptic in rather than the divine side?
Because it's it's a pre-evangelistic conversation, and that's the point of interest that people have. So what I think if you listen to the leaders of the campaign, what they would say is, man, there's 300,000 plus churches in America that need to be telling people about the divine side of Jesus. We're trying to foster and start a conversation about Jesus that causes people to look to the Bible to learn more. The other thing too, just transparently, it's really hard to run ads that would address how do you address the divinity in a 30-second ad? But you could point to the confounding love of Jesus and what he did on the earth and then say, here's a place to learn more. But ultimately, I think it's the folks who have created the campaign, again, I'm not folks who created the campaign, have said, this is the frame. We want to, and this is the bridge. And then, but they invite people to come and say, the Bible reading plans, or let's refer to churches that point to that. So I guess they would say, this is our piece of the puzzle. We're looking for others to pick up the rest.
Maybe this is it, and I don't know what's in their thinking, but if you ask skeptics, they don't believe Jesus is God, but they're all aware that Jesus did those things. And that's the narrative about him.
And so one of the things we have, like on the website and About Us, it talks about we're Christians who believe in the divinity of Christ. So I'm not sure exactly how it's worded, but there's a statement in there that specifically says that. But we recognize that a lot of people, if they fully believed in the divinity of Christ, they would have rightfully responded by repentance and by grace and through faith. So this is an entree point, right? So, and then from that entree point, you want to go elsewhere.
That makes sense. And by the way, some of the research out of Barna worldwide called the open generation, like 3 volumes in this. They said people are open to Jesus. And there's a sense where he's 2,000 years in the past and doesn't relate to my life today. Maybe at the root of this is trying to say, no, actually, he gets you and relates more practically with your neighbor. And even on issues that are bubbling up in culture today, maybe that's a way of bridging that.
So there's a bridge to culture. And I would say that based on what we're seeing in the metrics of how people are responding, they actually see a measured change in how people respond to and understand who Jesus is. And so again, there's internal polling things. So there's a percentage of people who are now more open to explore the Jesus of the Bible.
Right.
And to me, I mean, again, I'm just an advisor to the campaign, but I'm glad to advise and speak into and encourage when we literally can see metrics that more people are open to explore Jesus, and hundreds of thousands of people are actually doing that. So that to me is the strength of it. And again, I think a lot of things, early when it came out that it was the Green family were one of the key funders and key beginning, I think people sort of in the Christian world sort of know them and appreciate so much of what they do and they've done. And so what I would say is I would say, look to the ads themselves, recognize it's not for you, but if it moves the interest level of somebody, even if you don't, let's say I don't like it, but if Christ is being proclaimed and people are having a conversation, rejoice and pick up that conversation. Had a great call with somebody who wasn't happy with it. And I said, man, I get it, but are your friends talking about it? He said, yeah. He says, well, I know you're not happy with it, but it's not going to stop. So just a thought, why don't you talk to your friends about it? And he actually said to me, I'm going to do that. I don't have to go around critiquing this or that, but what I can do is my neighbor, his guy worked in a secular role, a friend. He said, I'm just going to talk to people. I said, then just the campaign's happy.
And honestly, maybe don't feel like you need to defend everything in the commercial because it's produced largely by Christians. Yeah. If you disagree with something in it, that's still a talking point. Go back to the scriptures, ask why, who is Jesus. That's the point to provoke.
I promise you that the founders and the leadership of the campaign would be profoundly thrilled if you disagreed with the campaign, but the end result was you had a conversation with someone who doesn't know the Lord.
Amen.
And shared with them the good news of the gospel.
What is your favorite?
The Super Bowl ad with the Patsy Cline song. That was my favorite one. So the two Super Bowl ads last year were pretty strong. I don't know if you saw them, but one of them has these people in conflict, and so you can feel the music kind of escalating in conflict, and then it just ends with, Jesus loved the people we hate. And it's like, okay, well, I mean, where do you go with that, right? So, and then the other one was talking about, was kind of a feel good thing with a Patsy Cline song. And so that was, that's fair. I've given you 3 in the answer to that. So I don't know. There's some that I like less, but I'm not going to tell you that. So,
that's fair. That's fair.
But those are ones the ones I like catch people's attention and they say, that's shocking. Jesus did that. And, and what does that mean for me? So to me, I keep coming back because I'm a missiologist, right? So if it builds the bridge and then causes people to explore, I'm like, that is the best. If it just creativity for creativity's sake, you can do creativity all day long. And again, you have super creative people like these people. The ad people are like insanely creative. But to me, that's success. People, and the fact that so many people went to see some of those ads, rewatched them over and over again, talked about them. I think that, to me, my favorite ads are probably the ones that get people talking about Jesus the most.
Fair enough. Good stuff. So any last words that we missed on the purpose of the campaign, what to look for in the campaign, how to use it, or do you think we covered it?
I think we covered, well, let me add one more thing. I think one of the misunderstandings is, particularly after last year's Super Bowl, was that was it. That was the pinnacle of the campaign. And I assure you it's not. It's an ongoing multi-year strategy back in the Super Bowl with 2 ads this year. So I want to say as a pastor, as a leader of a seminary and a school of theology, I want to say that this is a great time. Culture's in the midst of tumult and turbulence. We're going into an election year. What a great opportunity in the midst of all the turbulence and tumult to say, hey, let's talk about who this Jesus is. What did he do? Point them to the fact that he lived a sinless life. He died on the cross for our sin in our place. God raised him from the dead on the 3rd day, and you can receive him by grace and through faith. We're at an historic lull in evangelism in our world today. I mean, I can remember back to when in the 80s when people were doing a Tuesday night evangelism outreach and people were doing evangelism training every day and everyone was going to EE or whatever. And now we're at this historic low. And I would just say, if I could just ask Christians who have different opinions about all different things, is that you like it, don't like it, but the world needs to hear about Jesus. And if there's some people who want to help foster some of those conversations, why don't you jump into those conversations? In a world where evangelism is on decline, let's make much of Jesus. That's my thought.
I don't think we can add much more to that.
Drop the mic, baby.
Yeah,
Let's
baby,
go.
Let's go. Let me encourage our viewers and listeners, if you don't have the book, He Gets Us, and we'd encourage you, watch the Super Bowl if for no other reason than to watch the two commercials.
Only reason I'm watching the Super Bowl.
and to engage with your neighbors.
Yeah, amen.